One of the most fascinating questions about the Camino de Santiago, yet still unexplained, is what caused its decline and near demise at the end of the Middle Ages. The popularity of the route decreased dramatically from being walked by tens of thousands of people each year to just a few dozen pilgrims a few centuries later. This question, beyond being a historical curiosity, is also valid today, because although the Camino enjoys perhaps even greater popularity than in its origins, no one can rule out that history might repeat itself. However, to understand what caused its decline, it is necessary to understand its origins. In this video, we are going to explore the real origins, explaining the causes of its success as a pilgrimage, and the reasons that make it different and unique compared to the rest of Christian pilgrimages. This is Aventuras a pie de página, and I'm Esteban, your guide for today. This video is long and is divided into sections for quicker access. What sets Santiago apart from other major Christian destinations, such as Jerusalem and Rome, is that it was created, promoted, and funded by the Christian kingdoms of northern Spain, and not by the church itself. We have to assume that the kings weren't worried about saving the souls of the people in Western Europe. They must have had some deeper reason for spending so many resources. Let's go back in time to the beginning of the Middle Ages. With the slow collapse of the Roman Empire and the invasion of Nordic tribes, the Iberian Peninsula was fragmented into several Visigoth kingdoms, weak and poorly organized. In 711, the Arabs of the Umayyad Caliphate launched a lightning campaign against the Visigoth kingdoms of the Iberian Peninsula. In just 14 years, they managed to conquer almost the entire peninsula, reaching and crossing the Pyrenees Mountains. These raids were halted by the Carolingian Empire, forcing the Muslims back to the Pyrenees. Muslims were quite open-minded and allowed Christians to continue practicing their faith as long as they pay taxes to them. Despite the open-mindedness of the new rulers, it doesn't mean that everyone was happy with the new regime. In 722, a Visigoth nobleman named Pelayo organized a revolt against the occupiers, and with the victory at the Battle of Covadonga, the Kingdom of Asturias was born. Gradually in the following decades, Muslims kept being expelled from the northern Iberian Peninsula, and new Christian regions were created, such as the Kingdom of Navarre, the County of Aragon, and a bunch of smaller territories in the Pyrenees, that will act as a buffer between the Muslims and the Carolingian Empire, and which will be collectively known as the Hispanic March. In 776, the Beatus of Libana wrote about the preaching of St. James in Spain, after the crucifixion of Jesus. On the other hand, in the rest of the world, tradition always placed it in Jerusalem, where it was said that he preached from the time of Jesus' death, until his own death by decapitation in the year 44 AD, being the only one of the 12 apostles whose death is recorded in the official Bible, in the book Acts of the Apostles. Actually, this stance is still held by the Orthodox churches today, and there's an Armenian Orthodox monastery in Jerusalem, where they say the remains are preserved. It is in this context that somewhere between the years 813 and 830, a hermit called Pelayo saw some lights in the sky that led him to a Roman tomb in a forest called Liberdon, and that the bishop of Iria Flavia, named Teodomiro, later identified as the tomb of St. James. The data he used to identify the tomb is not known, but we can assume he probably decided to exploit the myths. Following such an important discovery, the bishop rushed to inform the king. King Alfonso II the Chaste saw a unique opportunity in this discovery. The remains of an apostle would give fame and prestige to his kingdom. Furthermore, in case Muslim troops invade, he could request help from other Christian kingdoms to protect this holy place. That's why he decided not only to confirm it, proclaiming St. James as the patron saint of his kingdom, but also to allocate funds for the creation of a first church over his tomb. In the year 834, Alfonso II made a pilgrimage to Compostela for the consecration of the first church dedicated to St. James, carried out by Bishop Teodomiro. Today, Alfonso II is considered the first pilgrim, and the Camino Primitivo the original way. His successor, Alfonso III, decided to raise the stakes, and in 872, he ordered to build a bigger church in Compostela, replacing the one Alfonso II had built. 2 years later, in 874, Alfonso and his wife donated a cross that had the inscription of St. James. And in the 890s, they made numerous donations to the Church of St. James to support the pilgrimage. Construction on the second cathedral was completed in the year 899, and it was consecrated by Bishop Cisnaldo. In those early times, the possible pilgrimages had to be of a local order. However, there are no records or remains of the necessary infrastructure. There is a remark from Sancho the Elder of Navarre, who stated that these initial pilgrimages were undertaken by the mountains to evade Muslim incursions. This route through the mountains is now known as the Old Way or the Forgotten Way, and there is a variation known as the Way of the Asturias, which proceeded north of the future French Way. In the year 930, arrives in Compostela the first foreign pilgrim, a Frenchman named Bretonaldo who decided to stay and live there. That same year, King Ramiro II also made his pilgrimage. In 939, a pivotal moment takes place. The Battle of Simancas fought between the troops of Ramiro and Abdurrahman III. In this battle, San Millan and Santiago appear on horseback to protect the Christian troops, or so it will be said centuries later, when Simancas will be transformed into Clavijo. And it is around these dates that there is a change in attitude from the Church as an institution and from the Carolingian Empire, which start to take interest in the way and in the remains. It is possible that the Church in Rome saw in Santiago the opportunity to fight against the Archdiocese of Toledo, the leader of the Church in the peninsula, at that time located in Arab territory. The Archdiocese of Toledo, in addition to promoting a liturgy different from the Roman one, had adopted heretical ideas according to the Pope's view, such as adoptionism, which states that Jesus is an adoptive son of God after baptism and not a natural son and product of the Holy Spirit. This idea was adopted by the Archdiocese of Toledo to have peaceful coexistence with Islam, which viewed Jesus as a prophet and not as an extension of God. That is why finally in 950, the first renowned international pilgrim, Gotescalco, Bishop of Lepuy, arrives in Compostela, lending his prestige to the route and an initial implicit endorsement from the Church. It is worth clarifying that the Church in Rome will need still around 150 years to officially recognize the remains of the Apostle, as it was finally done in the year 1100. This first signal by the Church of Rome towards the pilgrimage would allow for the establishment, along the route, of monasteries with Roman ideas, Roman liturgy, and that respond to Rome. This idea would be made explicit in 1074, when Pope Gregory VII exhorted Sancho I of Aragon, Alfonso VI of Castile, and Sancho IV of Navarre to rule as Christian kings and to repair the evil of Priscillianism, the perfidiousness of the Arians, the Arab and Visigothic invasions, and to stop following the leadership of Toledo and to follow the Roman Church instead. Nevertheless, the Christian kingdoms could not withstand the advance of the Muslim troops, and in 997, Almanzor's troops destroyed Compostela and its church, but not their relics, or so it is said. Speculating, we can think that there is a possibility that the news of the destruction of Compostela, but the preservation of the relics, helped to popularize the saint. In that same year, Bermudo II started the restoration of Compostela and its church. 4 years later, in 1003, this new sanctuary was consecrated, making it the third one in 150 years. However, this church was not going to last for long. The development of the pilgrimage as a proper route will begin in this century, which nowadays is known as the French Way. This effort will start gradually, beginning with the establishment of the Order of Cluny in Sahagún in 1020. Bridges were built where required, and settlements were founded in places of known danger and without pilgrim assistance, like Villafranca del Bierzo and Villafranca de Montes de Oca, which were predominantly populated by French speakers. As the route started to gain momentum, a larger, more impressive temple was required. The construction of the Romanesque cathedral began in 1075, and it was consecrated in the year 1105. This is the cathedral we know today, although it suffered several reforms over the centuries, like a new Gothic facade. Also, the kingdoms actively promoted the immigration of Franks by guaranteeing them property rights and exempting them from some taxes. This was done for some cities along the Camino, like Jaca in 1060 and Estella in 1090, where the newcomers established their own neighborhoods. Furthermore, this policy was used to repopulate reconquered cities like Zaragoza, Tudela, and Huesca between 1094 and 1119, ensuring they integrated with the local populations without creating separate neighborhoods. The flow of people along the Camino generated economic movement in the areas of foreign trade, pilgrim care, and produced a technology transfer, as immigration brought new sets of skills. Also, some pilgrims relocated to different towns along the way to offer services to their compatriots, which would facilitate the pilgrimage for future pilgrims and further popularize the experience. This environment created a virtuous cycle of growth, making the Camino easier and more popular. Of course, this popularity also brought negative effects, such as an increase in violence towards long-distance pilgrims who are frequently murdered to rob them. This mostly happened in France, and we assume they preferred the pilgrims on the way to Compostela, since they had to be loaded with enough money to cover the journey there and back. These events led in 1059 to Pope Nicholas II writing a letter to the bishops of Gaul, Aquitania, and Vasconia, demanding that they excommunicate anyone who rob or harm pilgrims. And with this, the safeguards for the pilgrims began to be established to facilitate their transit. In 1072, Alfonso VI of Leon revoked the right to collect tolls from the castle of Autares on the ascent to Cebrero for abusing and mistreating pilgrims. In 1076, King Sancho Ramirez of Aragon exempted the pilgrims from paying any tolls. In 1113, the Bishop of Compostela, Gelmirez, prohibited the taxing of pilgrims. In 1114, the Council of Leon decreed that pilgrims would be able to travel freely through the kingdoms of Spain. And on 1250, King James I signed an edict, which some historians have called an extraordinary privilege of security and safeguard, in which he ordered that pilgrims should not be disturbed anywhere in his domains until they have returned to their homes after their pilgrimage. The construction of Christian reception centers for poor pilgrims along the route was also promoted, the famous hospitals. This Christian hospitality consisted of a roof and a bed for sleeping, rations of food which in their simplest form would consist of bread and wine, but could also include meats, fish, soups, and cheeses, and medical care for those who needed it and while they needed it. All of this was free for pilgrims and financed by donations from nobles or by the exploitation of goods donated to the church. This generous hospitality, now known as Jacobean, would play a key role in the decline of the route. Meanwhile, in Santiago, there were all sorts of political interests, and thanks to the skill of its leaders, the Church of Santiago was gaining power and recognition, moving from depending on the Archdiocese of Padrón and the Archbishopric of Braga to depending directly on Rome. We will probably explore this in more detail in a future video. In 1170, a brotherhood named Los Frailes de Cáceres was founded with the idea of protecting the city against the Almohads and helping King Ferdinand II of Leon in his campaigns in Extremadura against the Muslims. This concerns the Archbishop of Santiago, Pedro Gudesteiz, because the plans of this confraternity include the reconquest of Mérida, a city that originally had the bishopric, and certain metropolitan rights that now belong to Compostela. The Archbishop then decided to grant patronage to this order. An alliance between Compostela and the Frailes would ensure that after the Christian reconquest of Mérida, the local bishops couldn't reclaim the rights that had been lost to Compostela. In return, the Archbishop of Compostela promised them good advice, weapons, troops, and money, plus the famous sword-shaped Red Cross as their banner. And so the Brotherhood of Cáceres is renamed the Order of St. James. Furthermore, over time, this order will acquire subsidiary duties, such as the repopulation of the recovered Spain, the rescue of captives, and the maintenance of hospitals for the poor, lepers, and pilgrims. In 1175, the order received recognition from Pope Alexander III, stating that its sole objective was to fight for the defense of the Christian name. The Camino will continue to grow at full speed for at least another century, becoming increasingly popular and drawing people from ever more distant lands. And that brings us to the end of the video about the origins. The conclusion is that the Camino did not arise simply from Christian devotion, but from an alignment of political and economic interests of the kingdoms of Spain and the Church in Rome. This explains why other Christian pilgrimages to more important sites never had a similar success to the Camino. If you liked this video, we suggest subscribing to the channel so you don't miss the next video in the series where we talk about the decline of the route. Plus, this analysis is part of my first book, Ultreia Suseia et Magia, which you can get as an ebook on our website on Ko-Fi. You can also check out our other videos about the Camino de Santiago, where we cover a variety of topics, such as reviews of different routes, intermittent fasting, what equipment to use, and which route offers the best arrival into Santiago. Thanks for watching and buen camino.